Hello and welcome back to the Independent Pianist. I'm your host, Cole Anderson. Before I get into the main content of today's video, I did want to do a quick invite. I'm playing a concert this Sunday with my good friend and collaborator Ava Packiam. It's in the Ocean Recital Hall at San Francisco Conservatory, which is a beautiful hall on the 11th floor of the Bose Center with a great view of the city. And apparently the Blue Angels will also be starting their show right around 3 p.m., so we're going to have some company probably for the second half of our concert. But it's free and open to the public, so if you happen to be in the area and you can stop by, I'd love to see you there. It'll be a great concert. So the subject of today's video is a piece by the currently active Peruvian Spanish composer Mónica Cárdenas. Mónica currently lives in Germany, and she has actually a very impressive body of compositions that she's already come up with. She contacted me back in January about possibly putting one of her very new preludes and fugues with Latin American influence on my channel. So I started listening to her own recordings of her works, and I really was fascinated by a lot of the stuff that she's doing, and I just fell in love with this particular sonata, the sonata Herencia. So I ended up asking her if she wouldn't mind if I did this one instead first. But I'm quite interested in doing some more of her music after doing this piece. It's such an amazing, beautiful piece. Mónica did send me a program note on this piece, so I'm going to read that actually right now, a little bit of it. So yes, here we go. Herencia means inheritance. Within contemporary classical music, this sonata has, in the first and third movements, an Afro-Peruvian rhythmic element, the festejo. This is something that she marks in the score, and I've also highlighted a few elements of it. This rhythm from the Peruvian coast is a dance of the black population of Peru with African roots. The second movement is a waltz, and then the third movement we go back to the festejo. This piano sonata is called Herencia, inheritance, because Peru inherited rhythms from African culture from the conquerors who arrived in Peruvian lands in the 16th century, who brought with them African slaves. So it has an absolutely fascinating background to it, but it's not simply of anthropological interest. The piece is actually very moving and powerful. Mónica invokes the idea of a sonata, and it does indeed use forms typically associated with the sonata. So the first movement is a kind of imaginative and somewhat condensed reworking of the sonata form idea, the first movement sonata form idea that we run into so often in all those classical sonatas by Beethoven and Haydn and whatnot. The last movement is a kind of rondo version, and then the middle movement is a very free fantasy-like waltz. So the festejo rhythm has a number of rhythms actually that seem to be associated with it. I actually found one in particular, one part of the festejo rhythm, which seems to come back again and again and ties the first and third movements together quite strongly. So it's this rhythm, which you can see in the kind of main theme of the first movement, and I'll play a couple of different sections where this particular rhythmic motive is really highlighted. So it's really that kind of strong, short, long effect on the beat, which seems to be so characteristic of this rhythm. Yum, bum, 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 bum. As I mentioned, the first movement is in a kind of reworking of the typical sonata form. She doesn't really start with a fully fledged theme. We start with this kind of reflective mood, and there are fragments of this festejo rhythm. You can see I've kind of marked here this kind of on the beat, short, long rhythm already starts, and it's wonderfully fantasy-like. The harmonies kind of wander a little bit, and in general throughout the piece there's kind of an ambiguity as to tonal center, which I find to be just absolutely irresistible. So ostensibly we are starting more or less in the key of F, but it's always a little bit ambiguous. Is it really F major or D minor or something else? And I actually really love that kind of ambiguity and flowing nature to the harmonies. So as I was saying, the kind of exposition section of this first movement begins with this fragmented version of the festejo rhythm, and then finally it develops into a full, very lyrical, expansive, beautiful theme, which features, again, the festejo rhythm. I just played you a little bit of it, but here's the actual full theme. Then after that, there's a wonderful kind of sequential pattern to round out the exposition, and we move on to a free development section. The development section also seems to start as if we were in some kind of a dream before launching into that really vigorous rhythmical version of the festejo, the full festejo rhythm now, really in dance form. Then there's a beautiful kind of a transition, and then we get a recapitulation. A slightly shortened recapitulation, but we get the main theme again in its full statement, and we also get that closing sequential motive and a little coda. So it's really that recapitulation which seals the deal that this is indeed something which is supposed to suggest sonata form, and it really does do that beautifully. Well, she puts her own kind of twist on sonata form, which I think is really wonderful. Sonata form is a very durable idea which has been used so often, and still people are coming up with great ways of using it. In the second movement, we get a little bit of a break from the festejo. Instead, we get this beautiful, wistful waltz. There's also this opening motive, this falling second opening motive, which you should take note of because that does tie the movement together. It features in the full waltz, and after the waltz has run its course at the opening of the piece, we get this kind of fantasy-like improvisation in the middle section that becomes very rhapsodic. It almost feels like the waltz is getting a little bit pulled apart and developed and sped up. And so we get this heated up version of the waltz where we actually get 2 waltz rhythmic revolutions per bar. It's actually a written-in accelerando in a sense. Then after that, there's a pause, the opening waltz returns, but now Mónica has written very specifically that it should be in a slower tempo. She writes 120 at the beginning and then 112 here. I took a little bit of a liberty in my performance. I couldn't help but play the waltz slightly faster the first time that it appears, so hopefully that was justified. I think it makes it a little bit more clear that the later appearance of the waltz is really supposed to be a bit slower. So it's a wonderful, wistful, nostalgic, beautiful movement. And then we get a spectacular last movement to round out the sonata. And as I mentioned, this is kind of a rondo-like form, so an A, B, A, C, A kind of structure. And we start with a very vigorous, powerful version of the festejo rhythm, and this intro is going to come back throughout the movement. So as I mentioned, this intro recurs. It's used as a transition between all the sections, the main sections of the rondo form. So then we get this very beautiful, generous kind of opening theme, which in mood is kind of reminiscent of that main theme from the first movement. The B section of this movement is one of my favorite parts of the whole piece. It's just a delicious evocation of some slow, sultry Latin jazz music. Then after the A section comes back, we get another episode, a C section, and here Mónica includes a suggestion of the Peruvian instrument, the cajon. I never actually knew before. I'd seen this percussion instrument used, but I never knew it actually originated in Peru. So you probably have run into this before. It's kind of a box. The performer sits on it and uses it as a percussion instrument. And it can actually create a wide variety of tones depending on what part of the hand you use and where you strike the instrument. So that's why in this cajon-inspired section, there are actually two pitches. There's kind of a deeper pitch and a higher one. And the cajon-inspired rhythm mixes in with the festejo rhythm, and it all culminates in this inspired callback to the first movement development. Let me show you a few sections side by side so you can kind of hear how that works. So the most explicit thing is that arpeggio, that same kind of arpeggio connector, which he reuses again in the last movement. And you just instinctively, you kind of recognize, oh, yes, it's coming back from the first movement. And then there's a fantastic coda, really dazzling coda that took quite a bit of practice to actually be able to play successfully. I mean, it looks difficult, but it's actually harder to play even than it looks. So that really did take a bit of practice. So really a fantastic piece of music. It's really been an honor for me to work on this and study this piece. I'm always excited working on pieces by composers who are actually active right now. So I strongly recommend taking a look at Mónica's work. I have her website linked in the description box. You can find a catalog of all her works that you can buy there. I really think that this piece makes a fabulous effect. For the most part, it's not that difficult to play, actually, except for maybe some spots in the last movement, which are quite tricky. It's definitely tricky enough, but it's very practically laid out for the piano. It works with the piano instead of against it. So very, very good for pianists, intermediate to advanced pianists who want to just have a beautiful piece of music that also has a very interesting backstory. So that's it. Thank you again, Mónica, for contacting me. I'll be in touch too because I'd be very interested in doing some more of your music. Check out Mónica's website and also come see me play this Sunday if you happen to be in San Francisco. Otherwise, just keep practicing. Take care until next time. This is Cole Anderson signing off.